So friends, we have in fact traversed the whole area of dramatic development in the background of the 20th century Europe, and the journey, so to say, was started by Ibsen, and it went up to, so far as Professor Payal Nagpal's presentation is concerned, up to the early 50s, when the world had completely changed from what it was in the 19th century Europe, 19th century Norway, where the dramatist called Ibsen occurred. He constructed his own images, and he shared those images with the people. The first important thing that Professor Payal Nagpal said in the lecture, and that went on through the whole lecture, was the performative drama, starting from the beginning itself, and that we have mentioned up to Bertolt Brecht and Samuel Beckett. But then there is another area of emphasis on which the expertise of Professor Payal Nagpal rests, and that is Jean Genet. So maybe she could now start from Jean Genet, who also was active in the 1950s and went on till the, I think, 70s or 80s, and he played a big role, and he's a very debatable, controversial writer. He is a writer who makes us feel uneasy completely and rattles us. He once again doesn't give answers, but the answers that are posed to him, they are the answers that he shreds to pieces. So that kind of playwright, and our own critic of drama, Professor Payal Nagpal, working so deeply in the analysis of Jean Genet. So that is going to be a combination worth going into. So Professor Payal Nagpal, please begin your discussion with Jean Genet.
Yes, I think we were talking about the 50s, the 1950s, and we were talking about the post-Second World War scenario. And much as Jean Genet, of course, lived to the 1980s, but the plays that he wrote were plays that were primarily written in the 50s and early 60s. Mm-hmm. And he just, after that he does not write plays. So he's, written other writings, but he's not, written any plays. And there's a great complexity that develops in his craft, and it's not something that one just sees right at the beginning. If one looks at the early plays like Death Watch and Maids, these are relatively, I would say, it seems that he's experimenting with this whole idea of what really speaking is the real world. What is it that we see around us? Is this world that we call the real world, is this real, or is this an illusion, and maybe the subtext is more real? So for instance, if the maids are working in a house, is the life that they are leading the real one, or what they are thinking, the way they play act, one of them pretends to be the madam, the other one pretends to be the other maid. So are they, in doing this, are they really speaking, saying that the world that they are playing out is probably more real, because it brings out the subtext. It brings out what they really think about these equations of power, the hierarchies that exist, for instance, between the madam and the maid. So I think this is the question that he's posing, because we also recognize the fact that Jean Genet stands outside the margins. He's not on the margins. He belongs to spaces that are absolutely outside of society, spaces of the rejects, spaces of, for instance, when we look at a play like The Balcony, locating it in the brothel, it's located outside of the society, inside the social structure, yet outside of it. So, these are factors. I mean, he chose to, in a sense, call himself a thief, and he writes the thief's journal. His own, excerpts from his own life are part of what is called the thief's journal, or for that matter, his own, the very fact that he chooses to, articulate what he thinks life is all about. So I think when we move from a play like The Maids to The Balcony, already the craft has changed. Mm. And if we compare Genet's work to that of other playwrights, it's very different. If we have to look at the term absurd in connection with Genet. And if at all we have to do that, because Genet himself rejected, at one point somebody said that, your work is connected with absurd and, expressionistic drama. He said that, there was nothing of the sort that he had done. So this categorization would be unfair, because, where they draw on and they choose to make sense of life, as we discussed, that it's a bold attempt to write at a time and to write a play at a time, which means that the writers want to connect with the audience. So, but if we look at Beckett, brevity, we look at Ionesco, the use of the absurd is very different. And when we come to Genet, it's completely different. And Genet's understanding of the absurd is not by raising this question of, let's say, human beings and rhinoceroses and so on, but asking what is it that we consider to be real.
So this conundrum of the real and unreal, that real is unreal and unreal might be real. Can you explain it a bit?
So I mean, my own understanding of Genet's work is that it's clear to him, and what he's using this craft, he's using, as you rightly call this, the conundrum. He's using this, he's articulating the conundrum and spending, in a sense, a lot of time honing this craft, so that he can say that the subtext is more real than the world in which we live. I mean, in a sense, a play like The Balcony, at the end of it, Irma is pretty much telling the audience that go back to your worlds, the ones that you think are real, but actually they are more fake than what you've just seen here. So he's doing this, I think, to make us think about lives, about social sections that we have ignored completely, and to also understand where is his voice located.
How is the unreal becoming an answer to the real, as far as he is concerned? What is unreal?
So what normative society would consider unreal is really speaking the subtext.
That is the real.
And what Genet is saying is, and to this I would, which is what I was saying, that where is his voice located? His voice is not speaking from the mainstream.
Not normative.
Not normative. He's not speaking from the mainstream. He's speaking completely outside of it. And he's, in a sense, if one may use a little bit of jargon, he's completely dislocating that center. And so he's saying that if you are deriving your meaning from this center, then there is something seriously wrong here. So he's dislocating the center and telling us that this subtext that we consider to be unreal, this unreal is what normative society is, looking at.
Let me just think of it myself and share this, kind of confusion. Subtext and text. Text is that which is there on the printed page. Subtext is that which is under it, which sometimes shows its face but then disappears. What is the subtext?
So here I'm not talking about the written word, I'm talking about the normative text and the social subtext. I think Genet is looking more at that. So, for instance, again, if I head towards The Balcony, or if one looks at The Blacks, I mean, a play like The Blacks, something that is most important in that play is the instruction given by Genet right at the beginning, that you have to have somebody, for the blacks to be performed, you have to have a white person sitting in the audience. So he's already creating what we can call a certain dialectic there. Move to his final play, which was really, very, if one looks at the screens and one looks at the maids, these are two completely different plays where, as I said, that, with each play, he's developing this craft even more about this dialectic between what we consider to be the real and the illusory, the unreal, the text and the subtext. So here it's not about the written text, but normative society looks at things, would like to look at, for instance, normative society would like to look at sections outside the margins of society from their point of view. Now, Genet is reversing that. Genet is rejecting it. He's not just reversing it, he's rejecting it.
So
he refuses.
Normative is unreal in that sense.
Yes, and he's rejecting it. He's saying that, if one has to look at the so-called rejects of the society that the normative society has thrown outside the margins, then one has to look at them from their own space, giving them voice.
So normative
that
society
articulation is important.
Normative society is a kind of imposition on the reality as such.
Yes.
It is superimposition, let's say, and it doesn't allow, it suffocates the reality beneath.
Absolutely. It doesn't, it completely suffocates, it suppresses, it glosses over all the many subtexts that we have in society. But I think where Genet is extremely important and very, very crucial, because there is also a tendency to look at the subtext by situating oneself in the normative world. But he is not doing that.
What is hell? I think he is using hell somewhere. No? In the sense, that there is a normative world which says that this is where the paradise is, and they know what kind of paradise they have already made. But then there is hell somewhere, and that is lurking all the time from beneath the surface, and is putting a kind of zero, putting a kind of darkness around what exists on the surface.
No, I think it is because if Genet doesn't locate it as hell per se, but what I'm just suggesting is that Genet does not believe in looking at, if one reads his works, and that's how one can interpret it, that there is voice and agency that is given to the rejects. This is not to be seen in, pretty much not in any other playwright. There is a tendency, as I said, to look at the people outside the margins by situating oneself within the normative world. You stand here and you look there. But Genet says no, you have to stand within their social space. The play will be situated in a prison. The play will be situated in a brothel. The play will be situated in, when it's about the blacks. It has to be done with, the blacks almost threatening, in a sense, the whites, which is, the apparent game that is there. It's the blacks is also subtitled a clown show. So I think giving this agency to the space as well as to the characters who belong to the spaces outside of society, I think that is the most valuable contribution, really speaking, that has been made by Genet as a playwright. He really makes us do away with the unseen sort of boundaries that we have in our minds, and is pushing us to go beyond that and to explore what really, what lies beneath.
You referred to Jean Genet as a person who would engage with writing the drama till the 60s or so, yes. And then he would abdicate it, he would leave it, and he would go into other areas of writing and expression. So what made him do that? Leave drama and go into the other regions of expression?
I think in his plays, the very fact that these plays are also, they don't end in a certain way, in the sense that, of course, Brecht's plays also don't end, but in the case of Jean Genet, this is slightly different. So the plays do not provide us with a kind of ending that we can be comfortable with. And it's not an ending that gives us closure at all. In fact, it makes us feel extremely uncomfortable. And in doing this, Genet is really speaking, I think, connecting here with the audience in a certain way by not giving them closure. But somewhere, I'm not too sure, but somewhere I feel that Genet also realizes, as a theatre practitioner, as a playwright, that he too needs to engage with the active world that is there. And in a sense, his writing, and there is a development in his writing when one moves outside of that, his participation in the struggle for the Palestinian cause and so on. So I think he wants to be more actively engaged.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
Because this person initially engaged with literary expression and then finally sought the answer in the real world outside. And the real world outside drama also.
Yes, and making it completely participative. So I think that is where Genet is very, very important as a playwright and needs to be read for this reason.
Say something about the use of symbols by Genet.
Gené's, symbols are complex, very complex, because we already have this one layer of the play between illusion and reality. That's just one part of it. But each time, if one looks at the maids, whether it's the dress, whether it's the flowers, we move to the balcony, the mirrors, and with each actor wanting to each character wanting to play a certain role in that particular play, carries with it a certain symbolism. So for instance, this whole section on the media, and he's writing in the 1950s, there's a section on the media where the photographers are there, and the photographers are telling the people who are the characters, not actors, but the characters who want to play the role of the bishop, the judge, the general, and so on. So they are being the photographers take the photographs in a way to project them as if they were real. So I think already something that of course Roland Barthes has also talked about, but in drama Gené is talking about it, and is talking about how reality is also a kind of projection. So this, I think, is this is again how he's also making us look through the symbols that are there. So when the photographers ask these characters to actually stand in a particular way, so that they can be, their demeanor is believable, that they're really speaking, looked as people who are a part of normative society. So I think there he's using heavy symbolism. Then again, the entire dialectic between the blacks and the whites in the play The Blacks screens again with symbols abound there. So but these are not symbols that are not rooted in reality. These are symbols that are constantly connecting and speaking to the real world in a certain way. So he never loses sight of that. His symbols will not simply, for instance, in the balcony, when the chief of police wants a mausoleum, it's not as if, the mausoleum is just, a symbol of his desire for eternity, but it is rooted in the larger game of power that's being played out. And he's, of course, Gené has done such a fantastic job of it right towards the end of the play. So the symbols are complex in that sense, and in fact his plays are very different from his prose writings, where symbolism is very, very intense. So, and he was greatly influenced by the French symbolists, of course.
One important point that has always been there in your discussions that you did earlier was regarding response of the writer to the reality of the time. And most of the responses were tragic, some of them were comic also, like Bernard Shaw's, like Beckett's himself. It's a kind of tragicomedy, he calls it in 2 acts. So this person seems to be entirely given to serious engagement or tragedy, but not to comedy at all. Would you agree?
The comedy, if we look at The Blacks and we choose to call it a comedy, he calls it a clown show, but it's very dark. It's extremely dark. So it's not the way the comic is used by the other playwrights. It is certainly very, very dark.
Generally about the drama that you covered from 19th century up to the 1970s and 80s, this kind of interplay between tragedy and comedy, positive and negative, real and unreal, what do you say about that?
Again, I think that given the times, when things are not making sense, when there is chaos all around, I think the lines that separate these categories, these lines are blurred. And when these playwrights make use of, and even for Beckett also, the humor is stark. It is very, very stark and very straight in your face kind of humor that he's using. So it's used as an expression of the times, which is why the use of the term tragicomedy, or The Blacks being a clown show. So it is something that's telling the audience that what they thought was tragic, what they thought was comic, and you separate it, it's again very chaotic. It's not going to make sense to look at categories that held meaning let's say, a decade earlier, would be a mistake. So I think that the entire movement that we look at from the late 19th to the 1960s, I think it gives us also this movement of understanding, really speaking, how modernity itself is transformed. I think the way we understand modernity in the late 19th century, moving through the avant-garde movements of the modernist period, and finally looking at the absurd in myriad ways. So I think it's one has to appreciate the work of these playwrights in terms of trying to make sense of their world in very different ways. So the modernity of an Ibsen is very different from the way modernity is understood by, let's say, Brecht, or for that matter, by the time we reach the 50s. I mean, are we really modern, is the question. Is modernity meant to bring humanity to this point, is a very crucial question. It's humanity is on the brink of collapse as far as these playwrights are concerned. So what
and
is
it's really in
mean?
collapse as things are moving
Yes.
in today's world.
So is modernity really, are we really modern in that sense? And of course, Brecht has already raised that question, that, we might be inventing a lot of machines and so on, but have we really adopted a scientific approach to social relations? I think that is an important factor. But of course, by the time, in the post...
It's not asserted, but it's always there.
It's always there.
Yes. And the, intensification of this particular idea, remains there behind the scenes.
Yes. And so I think that, from starting in from a world where we see the, modernity emerging in a new way to its, new forms through the decades of the early 20th century, to finally asking, are we really modern? And is this what modernity is all about?
In 1 minute, what would you say as a kind of message to the viewership, the way they have to visualize modern drama and how to make sense of it? Just 1 minute.
So I think modern drama is to be understood in terms of the term modern itself, first of all, about what modernity really meant at that particular time, and to also ask how that play speaks to us today and what is the modernity that we are looking at.
That's a very meaningful conclusion to the discussion that Professor Payal Nagpal has conducted today. And thank you very much. And viewers, there are lots of questions that are yet to be answered. And you, through your studies, you through your discussions in the classroom, outside, have to find answers to them. And maybe you are a part of that performative audience that Professor Payal Nagpal has talked about. Thank you.